On a Wednesday morning in October of 2018, the biggest truck anyone in Carroll County had ever seen turned onto County Road 44 and changed the course of about 200 people's day. The truck was a specialized heavy-haul rig designed to transport wind turbine components, the kind of oversized load that requires escort vehicles, special permits, and months of route planning. This particular rig was carrying a turbine blade, 180 feet of fiberglass and carbon fiber, gleaming white against the gray Iowa sky, worth about $2 million, destined for a wind farm being built 30 miles north. The original route had been planned 6 months in advance. Engineers had calculated every turn radius. Surveyors had measured every bridge clearance. The transport company had paid for road improvements at 3 different intersections to accommodate the blade's length. But a bridge inspection on Highway 30 had closed the main road 2 days before the transport was scheduled. The closure was unexpected, a crack in a support beam that couldn't wait for repairs. The transport company had 2 choices: delay the delivery by 3 weeks until the bridge reopened, or find a detour. They chose the detour. The detour had been approved by the county engineer. The roads had been checked by an advance team in pickup trucks. The weight limits had been verified. Everything should have been fine. But 3 days of October rain had done something to County Road 44 that nobody had anticipated. The rain had soaked into the ground, saturating the soil beneath the road's shoulders, turning what looked like solid grassy earth into something much more dangerous. And when the driver tried to navigate a tight curve near the Huber farm, a curve that required him to swing wide, putting his outside wheels onto the shoulder, those wheels didn't find solid ground. They found a mud pit with grass on top. The rig went in up to its axles and stopped moving. Let me tell you about what happened in the first hour, because it shows you how fast a problem can become a disaster. The driver's name was Tom Kowalski, and he'd been hauling oversized loads for 22 years. He'd transported turbine blades across mountain passes, through desert heat, over frozen rivers. He'd never lost a load, never damaged cargo, never had an accident that was his fault. When he felt his wheels sink, Tom did exactly what his training told him to do. He stopped immediately, shifted into low gear, and tried to ease forward onto solid pavement. The wheels spun. The truck didn't move. The blade, 180 feet of it extending behind him, swayed gently with each attempt. Tom tried reverse. Same result. Spinning wheels. No movement. The truck sinking deeper with each attempt. He called his dispatcher at 7:50. By 7:45 a.m., the escort vehicles had set up traffic control. The blade was blocking the entire road. There was no way for vehicles to pass on either side. The escort team radioed the county sheriff's office to report the blockage. By 8:30 a.m., the first backup of vehicles had formed. 20 cars on the west side, heading toward Carroll. 15 on the east side, heading toward Litterdale. A school bus driver called her supervisor to report she couldn't complete her route. By 9 a.m., the backup had doubled. People were getting out of their cars, walking up to see what was happening, taking pictures of the enormous blade that was blocking their way to work, to school, to doctor's appointments, and the truck hadn't moved an inch. Let me pause here and tell you about the road that was blocked, because it matters to this story. County Road 44 was the only paved route connecting the town of Litterdale to the county seat in Carroll. There were gravel roads that wound through the farmland, but they added 45 minutes to a trip that should take 15. For the 2,000 people who lived in Litterdale and the surrounding farms, County Road 44 wasn't just a road, it was a lifeline. When that road got blocked, everything stopped. The elementary school in Litterdale couldn't receive its hot lunch delivery. The pharmacy in Carroll couldn't send medications to the nursing home. The volunteer fire department couldn't respond to calls on the other side of the blockage. A woman in labor had to be transported by a neighbor's four-wheeler through a soybean field to reach the ambulance waiting on the other side. By 10 a.m., the county commissioner was on the phone with the state patrol. By 11 a.m., a television news crew from Des Moines was setting up cameras. By noon, the story was on every local station. giant turbine blade blocks rural road, hundreds stranded. And still, the truck hadn't moved. Now let me tell you about Rick Brennan, because he's the man who was supposed to fix this. Rick was 45 years old and worked as a regional logistics supervisor for Wintech Transport, the company that owned the stuck rig. His job was to make sure oversized loads got where they were going on time and without incident. When incidents did happen, his job was to fix them. Rick arrived at the scene at 9:30 a.m., driving a company pickup truck with the Wintech logo on the door. He was wearing an orange safety vest over a button-down shirt, a hard hat that he'd grabbed from the back seat, and boots that cost more than most farmers paid for a good pair of work shoes. He'd brought help. 2 heavy-duty wrecker trucks from a recovery company in Des Moines, each one equipped with a 50-ton winch. These weren't ordinary tow trucks. They were the kind of equipment that pulled semi-trucks out of ditches, that recovered overturned buses, that handled the jobs ordinary equipment couldn't handle. "Give me 2 hours," Rick told the sheriff's deputy who met him at the scene. "We'll have this rig on solid pavement by lunchtime." That had been 6 hours ago. The first wrecker had positioned itself on the pavement ahead of the stuck truck and deployed its winch cable. The plan was simple: anchor the wrecker with its outriggers, engage the winch, and pull the truck forward onto the road. The winch engaged. The cable went taut. The wrecker's engine roared. The stuck truck didn't move. What moved was the wrecker itself. Despite its outriggers, despite its 40-ton weight, the force of trying to pull the stuck rig was dragging the wrecker backward on the wet pavement. Rick called for the second wrecker. They positioned both trucks side by side, combined their pulling force, engaged their winches together. The stuck truck moved about 6 inches, then sank another 4 inches as its wheels churned the mud beneath them into an even deeper pit. "Stop," Rick ordered. "We're making it worse." They tried pulling from behind, thinking they could drag the truck backward out of the hole. Same result. The wreckers couldn't get traction on the wet pavement, and every attempt just dug the stuck truck deeper into the mud. They tried laying down traction mats, heavy rubber sheets designed to give wheels something to grip. The mats disappeared into the mud like stones thrown into a lake. They tried digging around the wheels with shovels, hoping to reduce the suction. But the hole filled with water as fast as they could dig, and the mud was bottomless, 3 feet down, 4 feet, 5 feet, and still no solid ground. By 3 a.m., Rick Brennan was standing at the edge of the mud pit, watching his career slowly sink along with the truck. The company was losing money by the hour, not just from the delay, but from the backup of other transports that couldn't proceed until this one was cleared. The county was threatening fines for blocking a public road. The television cameras were recording every failed attempt, and Rick had no idea what to do next. Let me tell you about Clarence Huber, because you need to understand the man before you can appreciate what happened next. Clarence was 72 years old and had farmed 240 acres on the north side of County Road 44 for his entire adult life. His father, William Huber, had started the farm in 1946, the year he came home from the war. His grandfather had farmed different land in the same county, land that had been sold during the Depression when the banks came calling. The Huber family had learned a lesson from that loss. Never owe money, never depend on anyone else, never trust that good times would last. William had run the farm on cash, buying equipment only when he could pay for it outright, expanding only when the expansion wouldn't stretch his resources. Clarence had continued that tradition. He drove a pickup truck that was 15 years old but ran perfectly because he maintained it himself. He used equipment that other farmers considered obsolete because it still worked, and he knew how to fix it. He had no debt, no loans, no payments. When commodity prices dropped and his neighbors went under, Clarence kept farming. He wasn't rich by any measure, but he was free. Clarence had watched the truck get stuck that morning from his kitchen window while eating breakfast. He'd shaken his head at the foolishness of taking a rig that size onto rain-soaked farm roads, and he'd gone out to do his chores. He'd watched the wreckers arrive and fail. He'd watched the crowd grow. He'd watched the news van set up its satellite dish. Through it all, Clarence had stayed on his side of the fence, minding his own business. Other people's problems were other people's problems. He had a farm to run. But by late afternoon, Clarence had a problem of his own. His daughter, Sarah, was stuck on the Carroll side of the blockage, trying to get home from her job at the county courthouse. His grandson, Michael, had a dentist appointment that had been canceled because the dentist couldn't get through from Litterdale, and the veterinarian who was supposed to check on a sick calf couldn't reach the farm because of the blocked road. At 3:30 p.m., Clarence walked out to his equipment shed and looked at the machine his father had parked there 72 years ago. The Caterpillar D4 had been manufactured in 1942 at a factory that was busy supplying equipment for the war effort. The Army needed machines that could build airstrips in the Pacific, clear rubble in Europe, pull stuck vehicles out of mud and sand and snow. The D4 was designed for exactly those conditions. A crawler tractor with steel tracks that could grip any surface, a low center of gravity that kept it stable on slopes, and enough torque to pull twice its own weight without breaking a sweat. William Huber had bought it in 1946 from an Army surplus auction in Fort Dodge. He'd paid $400 for a machine that had cost the government $6,000 new, one of thousands of crawlers being sold off as the military demobilized after the war. William had used the D4 for everything. Clearing land that was too wet for wheeled tractors, pulling stumps that wouldn't budge for horses, dragging stuck equipment out of fields that had turned to soup after heavy rain. The crawler didn't care about conditions. It just kept working, kept pulling, kept moving forward no matter what was in its way. When William died in 1978, Clarence had kept the crawler, not because he needed it every day. His modern equipment could handle most jobs, but because some jobs needed the old iron, because there were days when nothing else would work, because his father had taught him to never get rid of something that might save you when everything else failed. Clarence hadn't used the D4 in 3 years, but he'd maintained it faithfully, changed the oil, greased the tracks, started the engine once a month to keep everything moving. The machine was 86 years old, older than anyone in the county, and it ran as well as it had the day his father brought it home from Fort Dodge. Clarence climbed up onto the crawler's seat, pushed the starter, and felt the old diesel cough to life. Black smoke belched from the exhaust, then settled into a steady rhythm. The engine sounded like it always sounded, deep, mechanical, patient, ready to work. He put the crawler in gear and headed down the lane toward County Road 4. Now let me tell you about the arrival, because that's when the confrontation began. The crawler made a sound that nobody at the accident scene had heard before, a clanking, grinding rhythm of steel on gravel, the noise of tracks designed for mud and war zones eating up a country road. People turned to look. Cameras swung around. Someone said, "What the hell is that?" Clarence drove the D4 up to the edge of the blocked area, where Rick Brennan stood with his clipboard and his useless wreckers. The crawler was caked with rust in places. Its yellow paint faded to something closer to tan, its exhaust still coughing black smoke. It looked like something from a museum or a junkyard. Rick stared at the machine, then at the old man driving it. "Can I help you?" Rick asked, his voice carrying the exhaustion of 8 failed hours. Clarence shut down the engine and climbed off the crawler. "Other way around. I can help you."
"Help how?"
"I can pull that truck out." Rick looked at Clarence, looked at his worn Carhartt jacket, his mud-caked boots, his 72-year-old face weathered by decades of Iowa winters. Then he looked at the crawler, at the ancient, rusted, smoke-belching crawler that was maybe a quarter the size of his smallest wrecker, and Rick Brennan started to laugh. It wasn't a polite laugh. It wasn't a sympathetic laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes from exhaustion and frustration and the absolute certainty that you're looking at someone who has no idea what they're talking about. "You're going to pull that out," Rick said, gesturing at the stuck rig. "With that." "That's right. Buddy, that truck weighs over 200 tons with the blade. Your little toy there weighs what? 5 tons? 6? 7.5. 7.5 tons. And you think you can pull out 200 tons. Rick shook his head, still laughing. I've got wreckers that weigh 40 tons each. Together they couldn't budge that rig an inch. What makes you think your antique is going to do better? Tracks, Clarence said simply. What? Your wreckers have wheels. Wheels on wet pavement spin. They can't get traction. They're pushing against nothing. Clarence nodded toward his crawler. Those tracks don't spin. They grip. Every inch of track that's touching the ground is pulling. And this machine was built to pull tanks out of mud. A stuck truck ought to be easier. Rick's laugh got louder. He turned to his crew, spreading his arms wide. You hear that, boys? Grandpa here thinks his museum piece is going to do what our professional equipment couldn't. He thinks tracks are magic. The crew chuckled. Some of the crowd laughed too. The television camera swung toward Clarence, recording the moment. Clarence didn't react. He just looked at the stuck truck, then at the mud, then back at Rick. You've been at this 8 hours, Clarence said quietly. Road's been blocked all day. There's a woman trying to get to the hospital on the other side. There's kids who couldn't get to school. What? The fire department can't respond to emergencies. You're out of options. We've got more equipment coming. A crane from Omaha. A crane that won't get here until tomorrow. Another night with the road blocked. Another night of people stuck. Clarence shrugged. Or you could let me try. If it doesn't work, you've lost nothing but 15 minutes. Rick looked at the crowd, at the news cameras, at the county commissioner who was standing nearby with his arms crossed, at the sheriff's deputy who was clearly running out of patience. Fine, Rick said. Hook up your toy. When it fails, you can say you tried. And I can get back to calling people who know what they're doing. Clarence didn't respond. He just walked to the back of the crawler, where a coil of heavy chain hung from the drawbar. Let me tell you about that chain, because it's as much a part of this story as the crawler itself. The chain had been forged in 1944, made from the same steel they used for tank treads and warship anchors. William Huber had bought it along with the crawler at the Army surplus auction. 200 feet of links as thick as a man's thumb, rated for 80 tons of pull. William had used that chain for 50 years. He'd used it to pull stumps out of fields he was clearing for planting. He'd used it to drag a neighbor's tractor out of a creek bed after a flash flood. He'd used it to rescue a grain truck that had gone off the road in a blizzard, saving the driver from freezing to death. The chain had never broken, never stretched beyond its limits. Never let William down. Clarence had inherited the chain along with the crawler, and he'd treated it with the same care his father had. Every month he oiled the links. Every year he inspected each one for cracks or wear. The chain was 74 years old, and it was as strong as the day it was forged. Clarence uncoiled the chain and began walking toward the stuck truck. The mud sucked at his boots with each step. 3 feet from the road, 4 feet, 5 feet. The ground was soup, but there was solid earth beneath if you went deep enough. Clarence could feel it with each step, the way his father had taught him to feel it, reading the ground the way other people read books. He reached the truck and examined the frame, looking for the best attachment point. The front axle was buried. No good. The trailer connections were too weak. They'd tear loose before the truck moved. But there, behind the cab, a heavy steel crossmember designed to handle the stresses of hauling oversized loads. Clarence wrapped the chain around the crossmember, secured it with a heavy shackle, and tested the connection by pulling with his full weight. Solid. That would hold. He walked the chain back through the mud, paying out links as he went, until he reached the crawler. He wrapped the chain around the drawbar, secured it with a pin his father had used for the same purpose, and climbed up onto the seat. Rick Brennan was standing nearby, arms crossed, smirking. That chain's not rated for this kind of load, Rick said. You'll snap it before you move that truck an inch. This chain's rated for 80 tons. The pull I need is probably half that. I'm not lifting the truck, just breaking the suction and dragging it forward. The mud will let go once the wheels start moving. And how do you know the mud will let go? Because I've been pulling stuck equipment out of mud for 50 years. Because my father did it for 50 years before that. Because this is my land, and I know what's under that road better than any engineer with a clipboard. Clarence started the engine. Let me tell you about the next 10 minutes, because they're the reason this story is still being told. The crawler's diesel settled into a steady idle, black smoke rising from the exhaust in a rhythm that matched the engine's heartbeat. Clarence checked his gauges. Oil pressure good, temperature normal, fuel sufficient. Everything was ready. He put the crawler in gear. The tracks began to move. Slowly at first, the steel cleats gripping the pavement, the machine inching forward. The chain lifted off the ground, link by link, until it hung in the air between the crawler and the stuck truck. Then the chain went taut. The engine's note changed. Deeper now, laboring. The tracks kept turning, but the crawler wasn't moving forward anymore. All its power was going into the chain, into the pull. The stuck truck groaned. Metal stressed by forces it hadn't experienced. The blade swayed slightly on its mounts. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the truck moved. Not much, 3 inches, maybe 4, but it moved. The wheels that had been buried in mud shifted forward, breaking the suction that had held them for 8 hours. Clarence kept the throttle steady. The crawler's tracks kept turning, kept gripping, kept pulling. The chain hummed with tension but held. 6 inches, a foot. The truck's front wheels emerged from the mud, dripping black. Someone in the crowd shouted. More voices joined in. The television camera pushed forward for a better angle. 2 feet, 3 feet. The truck was moving steadily now, the mud releasing its grip with sucking sounds, the wheels climbing up toward solid pavement. Rick Brennan stood frozen, his smirk gone, his face blank with disbelief. 5 feet, 10 feet. The truck's rear wheels cleared the mud pit. The entire rig was moving, crawling forward at the pace of a walking man, pulled by a machine that was older than everyone watching. Clarence didn't stop at the edge of the road. He kept pulling, kept moving, dragging the truck another 100 feet down the pavement until it was well clear of the soft shoulder. Then he throttled down, set the brake, and let the engine idle. The road was clear. The crowd exploded. People were cheering, clapping, running toward Clarence and his crawler. The television camera was right in the middle of it. Someone started chanting, "Clarence, Clarence," and others picked it up. A woman was crying. She'd been trying to get home to her children for 8 hours, and now she finally could. Clarence climbed off the crawler and walked to the truck. He unhooked the chain, coiled it carefully the way his father had taught him, and carried it back to the drawbar. He hung the chain in its place, patted the crawler's rusty hood, and turned to walk back to his farm. Rick Brennan was standing in his path. The logistics supervisor's face was a map of emotions: disbelief, embarrassment, something that might have been shame. He was still holding his clipboard, but it hung at his side like he'd forgotten he was holding it. "How?" Rick asked. His voice was quiet now, all the arrogance gone. "I told you. Tracks grip, wheels spin, but the force, 7 tons pulling 200. I wasn't lifting the truck. I was just breaking the suction and providing traction. Once the wheels started moving, the mud couldn't hold them anymore. The hard part is getting things started. After that, it's just patience. My wreckers have 5 times the engine power. Power doesn't matter if you can't put it to the ground. Your wreckers were spinning their wheels on wet pavement. 90% of their power was going into noise and smoke. My tracks put every bit of power into the pull. No spin, no waste. Just force, applied steady." Rick was quiet for a long moment. "I laughed at you," he said finally. "You did. I called your equipment a toy, called you Grandpa, said you didn't know what you were doing. You did. I was wrong." Clarence nodded slowly. "You were wrong about the machine, but you weren't wrong to doubt me. You didn't know me. You didn't know this crawler. All you knew was what you'd learned from books and training courses, and none of that covered what I did today. Then how did you learn it? From my father, who learned it from his father, who learned it from men who worked with horses and steam engines and equipment that would kill you if you didn't respect it." Clarence looked at his crawler. "Modern equipment is safe, computerized. It protects you from your own mistakes, but it also protects itself from doing too much. When the load gets too heavy, it backs off. When the conditions get too hard, it stops. He patted the crawler's track. This machine doesn't know how to stop. It doesn't have sensors telling it when to quit. It just pulls until the job is done or something breaks. Today, nothing broke. Rick looked at the crawler for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. I'm going to give you my direct number. Next time something like this happens, and it will happen, somewhere, sometime, I want to be able to call you. I don't travel. Too old, and this machine's too slow. Then I want to learn from you. I want to understand how you did what you did, so maybe I can teach it to others. Rick paused. The industry is losing knowledge. Every year, the men who knew how to do this kind of work retire or die, and nobody's replacing them. We're all trained on computers and simulators, but nobody knows what to do when the computers don't have an answer. Clarence took the business card and looked at it. Come back tomorrow, he said. I'll show you what I know. Can't promise it'll help, but I'll try. Let me tell you about what happened in the weeks after. Because the story doesn't end with a handshake. The video of Clarence's rescue went viral. Not just local news, national news, international news. The kind of coverage that turns ordinary people into celebrities overnight. Iowa farmer outpulls modern technology, the headlines said. 1942 crawler does what million-dollar equipment couldn't. Clarence didn't give interviews. He didn't appear on talk shows. He didn't monetize his sudden fame. When reporters showed up at his farm, he told them he was busy and closed the door. But he did let Rick Brennan come back. Rick came every Saturday for 3 months. Clarence taught him about tracks and traction, about the difference between power and force, about reading the ground and understanding what was beneath the surface. Rick took notes like a college student, asked questions like a child, practiced on the crawler until he could operate it almost as well as Clarence. You're not going to find a lot of these old machines, Clarence told him one afternoon. Most of them were scrapped decades ago, but the principles are the same. Tracks grip better than wheels. Slow and steady beats, fast and violent. And the most important thing isn't the equipment, it's understanding what you're trying to do. What do you mean? Those wreckers you brought. They're designed for pulling vehicles out of ditches, off roads, in normal conditions. They're not designed for mud like that. You were using the wrong tool, because it was the tool you had. The right answer was to step back and ask what the problem actually was. And what was the problem? The wheels were stuck in suction. The mud was holding them like a vacuum. You don't beat that with more power. You beat it with different traction. Tracks spread the weight, grip the surface, apply force evenly. It's not stronger than your wreckers. It's different. Rick went back to his company and wrote a report. He recommended that heavy haul operations start keeping tracked equipment available for recovery situations, not just wheeled wreckers, but machines that could handle conditions where wheels failed. His supervisors were skeptical. Tracked equipment was expensive, they said, hard to transport, old-fashioned. Rick quit 3 months later. He started his own recovery company, specializing in the jobs that other companies couldn't handle. His secret weapon was a pair of crawlers he'd bought from a collector in Minnesota, vintage machines that other recovery companies laughed at until they saw what the machines could do. Let me tell you about Clarence Huber's last years, because they matter to this story. Clarence kept farming until 2023, when his doctor told him his heart couldn't handle the work anymore. He was 77 years old, and had been farming for 53 years, longer than most people stay in any career. He sold most of his equipment, modern stuff, things that other farmers could use, but he kept the crawler. Couldn't bring himself to part with it. That machine saved my father from bankruptcy during the drought of '56, Clarence told his grandson Daniel. It pulled his grain truck out of a flooded creek when everybody said it was lost. It's pulled more stuck equipment out of more impossible situations than I can count. I'm not going to sell it to some collector who'll park it in a museum. What are you going to do with it? Keep it. Maintain it. And when I'm gone, I want you to have it. Daniel was 32 years old and worked in IT in Des Moines. He'd grown up hearing stories about the crawler, had learned to drive it as a teenager, had watched his grandfather use it for jobs that nothing else could handle, but he'd never imagined actually owning it. "Grandpa, I live in an apartment. I don't have anywhere to put a crawler. You'll figure it out. The machine is patient. It's been waiting in that shed since 1946. It can wait a little longer, but someday someone's going to need what it can do, and I want it to be there when they call." Clarence died in his sleep in 2025, in the farmhouse where he'd spent his entire life. He was 79 years old. The funeral was held at the Lutheran Church in Lidderdale, and over 200 people came. Rick Brennan drove up from Kansas City, where his recovery company had grown into a regional operation with 15 employees. "This man taught me more in 3 months than I learned in 20 years of industry training," Rick told the mourners. "He taught me that new isn't always better, that understanding the problem matters more than having the biggest equipment, that sometimes the old ways work because the people who invented them understood something we've forgotten." After the funeral, Daniel loaded the crawler onto a flatbed trailer and drove it to his parents' house, where there was room in the barn. He couldn't maintain it the way his grandfather had. He didn't have the skills, not yet, but he hired a retired mechanic to come out once a month and keep it running. "Grandpa said someone would need it someday," Daniel told the mechanic. "I want it to be ready when they call. Let me tell you one last thing, because it happened just last year. In 2025, 6 months after Clarence's death, a construction company in Carroll County got a piece of equipment stuck in almost exactly the same spot where the wind turbine truck had sunk in 20. Different company, different equipment, a road grader this time, but the same mud, the same road, the same impossible situation. The construction company called every recovery service in the region. Nobody could help. The mud was too deep, the conditions too difficult, the equipment too heavy. Then someone remembered the story. The foreman called the County Historical Society, who called the newspaper that had covered the original rescue, who finally tracked down Daniel Huber in Des Moines. "I don't know how to do what my grandfather did," Daniel said. "I can operate the machine, but I don't have his experience." "What, do you know anyone who does?" Daniel thought about it. Then he called Rick Brennan. Rick drove up from Kansas City the next morning, trailering one of his own crawlers behind his pickup. He spent an hour examining the stuck grader, testing the mud, planning his approach. Then he turned to Daniel. "Your grandfather taught me everything I know about this, but this is your machine, your land, your family's legacy. I'll tell you what to do, but you should be the one driving." Daniel climbed onto the crawler. Rick walked him through the process, where to position, how to attach the chain, how much throttle to apply. It was exactly what Clarence had done 7 years earlier, except now it was the grandson learning what the grandfather had known by instinct. The grader came out of the mud in 12 minutes. Afterward, Daniel sat on the crawler's seat for a long time, looking at the machine his great-grandfather had bought in 1946, that his grandfather had maintained for 50 years, that had now saved its 4th or 5th or 10th, nobody had kept exact count, piece of stuck equipment. "He's still here," Daniel said quietly, "in this machine, in what it knows how to do." Rick nodded. "That's how knowledge works. It doesn't die with the people who carry it. It lives on in the machines they built, the techniques they developed, the students they taught. Your grandfather taught me. Now I've taught you. Someday you'll teach someone else. And the crawler will keep doing what it's always done, waiting for someone to need it, pulling things out of places they shouldn't be, proving that some things don't become obsolete. They just wait for the world to remember why they were made." The 1942 Caterpillar D4 is still in the barn at Daniel's parents' house. The mechanic still comes once a month to keep it running. The chain is still coiled on the drawbar, oiled and ready. And somewhere in Carroll County, people still tell the story of the day the road got blocked, and an old farmer with an old machine did what modern technology couldn't do. Rick Brennan had wreckers worth $1 million. Clarence Huber had a crawler worth maybe $10,000. When the mud made the choice, it chose Clarence. It always chooses the one who understands it best.